My name is Erika Mandler. I was born in Vienna, Austria, on July the 22nd, 1922. My maiden name was Erika Raab. My family and my brother, Kurt, who is 9 years older than I am, lived in a very lovely, spacious apartment in a 4-story apartment house on the Nickelgasse number 1 in the 2nd district of Vienna. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor, door number 7. I had a wonderful, very, very extremely happy childhood. My family, the household of my parents was strictly Orthodox kosher. We belonged to one of the most Orthodox synagogues in the 2nd district of Vienna. It was called the Schiffschule, which it was located in the Schiffgasse, or Schiff Street, and my parents were members of this synagogue, and I remember going with my mother, and we sat up on the balcony, mother and I, and my father and my brother were downstairs, and we had a very strict kosher household. My family, uncles and aunts and cousins, were a very close-knit family. We all lived in walking distance. It was lovely. On Friday night, I shall never forget, Friday night was a very, very special night in our household because Mother prepared a very festive Erev Shabbos meal, and my grandmother, who by that time already was a widow, and my aunt, who was a single lady, she lived with my grandmother. They came over to our house every Friday night for dinner, and it was evening I should never forget. A very special memory in my mind always will be my grandmother's birthday, because it fell on the 3rd night of Hanukkah. And it was very, very special because all the family, uncles and aunts and cousins, gathered at her house, and you can imagine it was quite a group. And the 3rd light of Hanukkah was lit, and then we all had presents for grandmother, and we had flowers, and the children had to memorize little poems, and each one of us went and told our little poem and handed grandmother flowers, and that was a very special event in our family. As a child, one of my hobbies was ice skating. I was not a figure skater, but I loved going to skate. And in Vienna we had skating rinks right in the neighborhood, and I could just come home from school and change my clothes and go skating for 1 or 2 hours. I went at least 3 or 4 times a week, and that's where I met my friends in wintertime. And it was great fun. I went to grade school and what you call here junior high school, to a school, believe it or not, the building is still standing, and the name of the school was Sperlschule. It was located in the Sperlgasse in Vienna. It was about I would say a 10 to 15 minute walk for me. And by that time, my brother, who was 9 years older, was already in the gymnasium, and he always wanted to go into medicine. So he started in medical school, but I didn't really wanted to go on to the gymnasium. As a child, I've always been interested in needle and thread. And for some reason, I wanted to do something with my hands. And so we decided that I would go rather to trade school and learn a profession that I could a trade that I could do and enjoy. So I ended up going to a 2-year trade school, which was called Krügerheim, and they taught regular subjects like you get in any other school, but the main emphasis was on sewing, and that's where I got my basic training in sewing. I do want to tell you about the friends as a child. I had a group of really incredible boys and girls as friends when I grew up. My parents, although being very orthodox and religious, they were very tolerant and very broad-minded, and they never objected that I would have non-Jewish friends. So they didn't mind, they didn't object of me going even to, I remember so well, going to midnight mass Christmas Eve, because they felt, well, that's part of education, world education. And I remember that so well, and I also remember helping my non-Jewish friends decorate the Christmas trees, and that was fun. And then in turn, for Passover, my mother made matzah balls by the hundreds of dozens, and we gave to all of our non-Jewish friends plates of matzah balls with instructions how to cook them. And so it really was a very liberal and wonderful childhood for me. And those first 15 years of my life in Vienna were the most wonderful 15 years any child can have. Hitler took over in Germany in 1933, and in 1934, my mother's youngest brother and his family fled from Germany. He and his family lived in Berlin, and he had a shoe factory. And he was already persecuted, and he felt that the time has come to just get out. And they came to Vienna just with their shirts on their backs. And that was really the first time as a child that I realized that anti-Semitism exists, and something terrible is brewing somewhere. And so this uncle and his wife and 2 children came, and my family then in Vienna helped them to get back on their feet and begin a new life, so to speak. But then at the end, he perished with all the other family, during the Holocaust. Well, then time went on, and then I remember that dreadful Friday of March the 11th, 1938, a night I shall never forget. My father and brother came home from shul, from the synagogue, and Friday night dinner was served, and my grandmother didn't come that Friday night because we all had an inkling something was brewing. Something I mean, after all, we read the newspapers, we knew what was coming. But and I must tell you, in our household, on Friday night or Shabbos, the radio was never played. But that night, the radio was turned on because we needed to know what was coming. And sure enough, we heard the speech of the then president of the country of Austria, Dr. Kurt von Schuschnigg, where he told the country that he is surrendering Austria to Hitler and the Germans. He does not want to shed any Austrian blood, therefore he is surrendering. And when we heard that, my mother was just horrified. The first thing, and I remember this so well, she said, well, this is the end. This is the end for us. This is the beginning of the end. And of course, that was a terrible situation. No one knew what to do next. Where do we go from here? And it was unbelievable. You cannot imagine the instant change in people. It seemed like the Austrians were ready for it. It seemed like the Austrians, policemen even, had their banner in their pockets to put on their arm with the big swastika. It seemed like that they knew what was coming way ahead of time. And not only that, but it hurt me as a child so terribly how my non-Jewish friends immediately were told that they couldn't play with me, they couldn't call me, and how they turned against me. Things were so bad that, for instance, my brother, who was already studying at the university, medical school, could not go to the university to pick up his papers because Jews were not permitted to enter the building. I couldn't go and play in my beloved park, which was just 15, 20 minutes away from my house, because there was a big sign on the entrance posted, dogs and Jews are not permitted. Benches in the park had painted overnight. This all happened overnight. They had signs painted on the bench, not for Jews. The Hitler Jugend began their horrible persecutions and terrible things. Just overnight it came, where they stopped Jewish men, for instance, with beards, and either cut the beards off, or in some instances they took a match and burned the beard. And no one came to the rescue. People were just standing, watching, but nobody would come and help or stop these youngsters. Then I remember the incidents where the Hitler Jugend, or the Nazis right away, would paint signs on the street, on the sidewalk. And then the next morning they would catch Jewish people and had them just come and bend down, and you had to scrub it off. They had buckets with water, and no matter how you were dressed, and they asked the Jewish people to clean the sidewalk, you see. Of course, the next thing was that all the Jewish stores were marked with Star of David, and windows were broken, and so it was a devastating, immediate, overnight experience. The next day, the Germans were marching in right away. It was all so as if they were waiting at the border and couldn't wait to get in and take over Austria. That was the day of the Anschluss, the famous Anschluss. Of course, for us, we had to make a decision. Now, what is to be done? My parents had a legal passport and could prove that they would go to Czechoslovakia to open their business, you see. But then the question came, at the time, it was a hard time to get a visa. You could get your visa if you could prove that you are coming back, because Czechoslovakia at that time didn't want any more Jews either, you see. So my parents told them, well, we are coming back because our children are here, you see. So they did get the visa, and my parents left for Czechoslovakia. And my brother and I stayed in Vienna, and our apartment was closed up, and we moved to my grandmother's house, and I could finish my school. But then my brother, he kept listening to the news, and of course we all did, and listened and realized the development wasn't getting any better. And we realized that things were getting rather bad too in Czechoslovakia, and Czechoslovakia was mobilizing in September, and getting sort of something is going to happen there. And we realized if we don't try to get to our parents, we may never have another chance. Of course, there was no way for us to go legally. So my brother immediately checked out the possibility of a way of crossing the border illegally. And of course, I didn't know anything about it. He didn't tell me anything, but he made the contacts. And he found out that it is possible. Of course, with money, anything was possible. And he found out that there was a way that we could cross the Austrian border into Czechoslovakia if we can manage to get 400 German marks. And I don't know where he got it, but he got the money. We arrived at 11 o'clock at night, and we made our way to the house of my cousins, where my parents were, and we rang the doorbell. And of course, my parents had no idea we were coming. And you can imagine, it was a absolutely crying, tearing welcome, and it was a wonderful, wonderful reunion, because they never dreamt that they would see us alive again. So in that, we ended up then staying in Trenčín with my parents. My mother started doing a little bit of cooking for people. My brother, who already knew perfectly English, gave private lessons in English. And I found a job at a tailor. I was only 15 at that time. March 42, we were, you see, we were already noticing changes, and we saw the persecution became already very noticeable in Czechoslovakia. And Czechoslovakia had 3 camps where they held Jews. And Nováky was the one that was close to where we lived. It was in northern Czechoslovakia. March of 42, my parents, my brother, and I were taken to Nováky, which was a camp for, they called it holding camp for Jews. It was sort of a working camp, you see. The camp was guarded and held by the Slovaks. Compared with any of the other concentration camps in Poland and Germany, it was paradise, I would say, compared to them. First of all, we could stay together. They didn't separate men and women. That was one plus. And then the 4 of us, my parents, my brother, and I, could stay in one room. The barracks were divided in rooms. And it was very small, but we had 4 bunks. There weren't beds, there were bunks. And we brought, you see, we brought our own suitcases with stuff, so we had our own things. But there were no bathrooms, no showers, no bathtubs of any sort. And we bathed ourselves in a basin right in our room. We had to carry water, and then we had communal bathrooms, like latrines, you know, open. And then there was one kitchen which supplied food for us, 3 meals a day, and we went with our little pots and got our food, and everyone had the same. And so that was actually, and then everyone who could work was stationed at a certain place where they could work, you see. And my brother then did get permission to help with at the infirmary and with the doctors, and he was very happy about it. And I met my future husband, Dr. George Mandler, who actually came to Nováky 6 months before I did. So he was already established, so to speak. And he had the privileges to go down into the village once a week to buy supplies, and so that was really nice in a way. So you could get information, and you got you learned what's going on in the outside world, you see. And so time passed, and we all lived, of course, not knowing what tomorrow brings. And until September 1943. And again, the high holidays approached, and the camp commander received orders from Germany that they want 300 Jews. You see, this camp was a holding camp, and from there they so to speak shipped Jews into Auschwitz, which at that point, we, the inmates, really didn't know where we were going. But our leaders knew it, and of course the commander did. So anyway, there in September of 43, everyone was told, all 1,600 inmates were told to stand outside in rapport. And the commander came and he said, if I read your name, whoever is called is to step forward. And we didn't know what would happen. So he called the names, and all of a sudden we hear Simon Raab, Henriette Raab, Kurt Raab, Erika. And we stepped forward, and those people had to pack their bag and were ready to be taken down by trucks to the railroad station. And of course we were horrified. We knew we were going somewhere. We had an inkling that they called it resettling, but we knew it would be something worse than that. So by that time, Dr. Mandler and I already had been in love, and we felt real close. And he stepped forward, and he told the commander, he said, if this woman goes, I go. And the commander said, now you can't go. I need you. You are a doctor, and you know we need you here. He said, I don't care. I love her, and if she goes, I don't want to live. I am going. So he said, all right, she can stay. And they pulled me out. And after it was sort of settled down and everyone packed their, belongings and ready to go, and it was just awful. To think that my parents are going to leave, and my brother, and I just couldn't bear it. And I went to George and I said, now I can't live knowing that my parents are going, and I'm sure they go to certain deaths, and please, I just don't want to live this way. He said, well, don't worry, I'll do my best to get them out too. My husband's brother, you see, the camp had a group of Jewish leadership also, and they in turn performed the duties and gave orders from the orders they received from the Slovak guards. And my husband's brother was the sort of the leader of it. And so, to make a long story short, my later husband, told his brother and begged him to, what if he could please help to get these two old people out and my brother. And they did get rescued, but they were already in the train, in the cattle train. And the commander came down and called the three names, and my brother and my parents. But the tragedy of the story is that they had to fulfill, you see, 300 people. So 4 other people had to go in our place. We stayed then in Nováky until life went on, and by that time the Jewish commanders had a way of listening to the radio, and of course they listened to BBC, and we were informed as to the world situation and the preparation for war and everything. So I do remember my husband telling me then that they received a letter in 1943 from the Warsaw, when the Warsaw Uprising began, and in the ghetto, you see, and they knew about Nováky, about the concentration of Jews, and they sent a letter to us asking for help and asking if we could send weapons, guns, to help them. Of course, we couldn't, and we didn't, but it sort of gave us again the knowledge of what is going to happen and the annihilation of all the Jews of Poland and what is facing us if we won't be liberated in the meantime. August the 6th, 1944, all of a sudden the gates of the camp were opened. Nobody told us anything. You see, the Germans had marched closer to the Czech borders, and the Slovaks could not hold us any longer. So they just opened the gates and, so to speak, told us, you are free, go, but you are on your own, whatever you can do. And the commander had 2 or 3 trucks back up into the camp to get young Jewish men in the trucks who wanted to join the army and fight. And my husband was one of them who wanted to join because he was an officer before and he wanted to fight in the Czechoslovak army. And so he left on the truck, but he told me he will be back to help me save my parents. And he came back after a few days, and we took my parents, my 2 old parents, and my brother went with us, and we drove them up into a small village. Again, I can't tell you the name of the village. It was right under the mountains, and tried to save my parents in a farmer's house. It happened to be the very last house of the village, right under the mountains, and asked the farmer if he would save those 2 old people for us. And my husband had money, and he gave him some money, and he said, please save those people for us. And I stayed with my parents, and my husband said, now, of course, we were not legally married, but we were in love, and we knew we would get married as the first chance we would have in liberation. And my husband said, now I am going to be with the army, and I send for you as soon as I can. And I stayed with my parents. And a month later, he sent a soldier to fetch me. And this soldier took me to the town of Harmanec, where the Slovak national uprising was started. We stayed in Harmanec for until about October 1944, when the German SS, it wasn't just German army, it was the worst. The German SS stormed in and took over, and the Slovaks could not hold the border anymore. And it was in the middle of the night, and they woke us up, and everybody ran for your life. And Harmanec was a town located in the valley, and on one side of the mountain were the Germans, and we had to run up the other side of the mountain. And we grabbed our knapsack and got our shoes on in the middle of the night, and we ran up the mountain, just everyone, the soldiers, the officers, and I, because the only place we had to go to survive was go into the mountains. There was another couple who sort of clung to us, and they went with us. And my husband and this other man started taking small pine trees down, cutting pine trees down, and chopped the branches off the trees, and then they dug a hole into the side of the mountain and lined the walls and floors of this hole with tree trunks so we wouldn't touch the dirt, you see, and we used the branches as mattresses. But anyway, time went on, and then we found out that the Germans came closer and we needed to go deeper into the mountains. As time went on, all four of us became infested with lice. We had head lice and body lice, and there was nothing we could do. We had no change of clothes. I had no toothbrush. I had absolutely nothing. And the food situation was very, very bad. After we were in the third bunker, we of course, we heard shooting. We heard grenades, and we knew the partisans were in the mountains. We knew it. But the question was, how do we get to them? Because we knew we had to get out. We had to make contact. And it just so happened one day the partisans knew also that we were there. Not just we, but there were many people hiding. There were Slovaks hiding, you see. And they sent the Russian soldiers out to contact all these people and ask us, would we go with them? Immediately, we, of course, agreed, and we joined the partisans. Now, this was March 1945. Now, you must know I was 7 months pregnant. But that was fine, and all I had was clothes I had on myself, the 2 sweaters, and of course I had no gloves, but I remember putting my sleeves over my hands and try to keep warm. And high snow. It was, deep snow. And he told us that, this commander told us that we would, in order to get to freedom and get to the other side of the mountain, we would have to march over the Dumbir mountain, which is the highest mountain in Slovakia, in order to get over on the other side, the eastern part of Czechoslovakia, which was already occupied and liberated, by the Russians, you see. And it would take about 5 days. So we marched day and night as much as we could. We made it across the mountain, and we were liberated. In May of 1945, I gave birth to a little girl, and it was a very joyous occasion, of course, and unfortunately the child was had malformations, and no wonder, through what all I had to go through, and the little girl only lived for 2 days. After that, it was very. You cannot imagine the turmoil. You couldn't get a train. Nothing worked because the moving of soldiers, you see, and everything was confused and. Our only thought was we wanted to carry on and find our parents, and so after I recovered, we decided to go back to close to Nováky, where we had hidden our parents, hoping to find them. And my brother happened to be there. It was just luckily. It was just a coincidence, and of course, unfortunately, when we came there, the farmer told us, what you came to get, I can't give you. Unfortunately, your parents were well, what happened, one of the other farmers in town found out about this man hiding two old people, and he told, and it was just the very end of 1944. The Germans came with a truck and took my parents, and my mother, the farmer told us my parents went on their hands and knees and begged for their life, but they didn't have any mercy and took them, and my mother starved to death at Ravensbrück camp, and my father died in Buchenwald. So then we tried to make our way back into the center of Czechoslovakia, and my husband, and he went to the health department in Prague and just told them, I'm a physician, I'm available, where do you need me? So they said, yes, we need a specialist in Leitmeritz. So we took the train to Leitmeritz in August of 1945. And my brother-in-law went back to Prague. He was a chemist, and he got his old job back. And he lived in Prague, and he told us, right early in 45, he said, now, you should register with the American embassy because the situation, okay, we are free, but the situation is not going to stay this way. The communists are definitely going to take over. And my husband wouldn't believe it. And so my brother-in-law registered with the American embassy right away, and their number was 25 and 26. You see, Czechoslovakia had the quota system with the United States, and you had to wait till your quota came. And they would only allow 400 people to immigrate to the United States a year. And so I'm telling you this because when my brother-in-law told my husband to register, he said, well, I'll think about it a day or two. And that day or two cost us 4 years of waiting. My brother-in-law left for New York the end of 1945. We came on the Queen Mary. I'll never forget when we came into New York, December the 17th of 1949, we arrived at the harbor of New York City, and George and I were the last people to get off the ship. And my family and my husband's family thought we probably didn't make it because everyone else came down but us. But we were standing at the railing looking at the Statue of Liberty. We were free. It was incredible.